All right, so we've had the skyscraper above, and now we've had the skyscraper below, and both of them speak to the very latest materials, techniques, and so on. And so I thought, as a great counterpoint, that we would invite Michael Green next. Michael Green is an architect now based in British Columbia. He's worked on many hugely important projects all over the world. He built the airport in Ottawa. He had a hand in the airport in Washington. But what really has brought him to the very highest focus most recently is that he published a case study for tall wood. Michael proposes to build tall buildings out of wood. Michael, come on out here.
I have to say, that was a great presentation, and there are incredible things happening in Mexico. Actually, the Mexican architecture community is something to really watch right now. I thought I'd start at the opening of the program that we all received when we started, is this great quote above me: technology is anything invented after you were born. But I thought I'd put a counterpoint to that, which is sort of the beginning of the way I think about my work right now. Technology is anything Mother Nature invented. Of course, I'm being slightly facetious. But I think my story really begins with this formula that we all know, and we can all say what, of course, this is. Say it together, everybody. It's photosynthesis. This is what we're looking at here. I Googled it. I'm an architect. I don't know this either. Photosynthesis provides our atmosphere with oxygen. It provides us with the energy that feeds most of life on Earth. It's an incredible thing that, I'm sure eventually we'll get an app for it, but right now it's a pretty phenomenal piece of technology that Mother Nature has given us, which through its beauty and elegance has given us the material that I've grown to really love, wood. And I've grown to sort of see wood, and this image really captures it, as the fingerprint of nature in my buildings. It's a material that, just like snowflakes, no two pieces of wood can ever be the same. And therefore, we have a unique relationship when we work with it, when we walk around in a wood building, when we sit at a wood table, or when kids play with a wood toy. There's something different about the relationship. Now, I live in BC. I grew up in Ottawa. Actually, I was born in what's now Nunavut, so high above the tree line, ironically. But I live in a forest now that has trees that are 33 stories tall. And down our coast, we have trees that are 40 stories tall in the great redwood forest. But ironically, we're only allowed to build in Canada and the United States buildings that are 4 stories tall in wood. It seems preposterous when you walk around in our forests how big these trees are, and yet we really aren't capturing its capability as a material. I like to think that wood is the actual most technologically advanced material I can build with. It's just that we're not thinking of it the way we think of man-made materials. And we are only beginning to sort of recapture, bring back the traditions of the past and reinvent them for a tradition of the future in the way we think about a material that's grown by the sun, a material that is rapidly renewable, and now a material that we don't need to let grow to hundreds of years old. We can actually capture and harness as trees that are only 12 and 15 years old and make great structures. So we've been working for really the last 6-7 years. I've been working and talking about the future of skyscrapers made of wood. I'll come back to the image of the buildings that are up here. But I started talking probably about 5 years ago at the Australian Green Building Council about the idea of building 30 stories in wood. And people really thought it was crazy. It really did not compute that would be possible. And I was over in Australia, and I flew home, and the media had happened to pick it up, and it was on the front page of the National Post that I was going to actually build a 30-story building, and I was actually going to build it in Prince Rupert, BC, which, if any of you know where Prince Rupert is, it's the far northwest corner of, it's probably got a population of 10,000 people or something, and they were going to get the world's tallest wood building. And yet, the great thing about it is that sparked a sort of storm of controversy in a way, and a conversation about whether or not this was a good idea and why it would be a good idea. So I thought I'd explain it. The really fun thing for me is that was 4 or 5 years ago, but in that time, and when we published this report, this 250-page report on the case study of why this is an important idea, it ignited a real storm of change in the last year and a half. And just a week and a half ago, the architecture firm SOM that designed the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, and have designed 5 of the world's top 10 tallest buildings, released a report where they think 42 stories is possible in wood, and that they're committed to spending energy to figure out how to make this real. Now, that gave me great pride as a small architecture firm in Western Canada that one of the great architecture firms of the world has picked this up. And the truth is, many of the world's big engineering firms and architecture firms are now looking at this idea. This is a very slow-changing industry, architecture. We're very conservative. It's very important we build safely. And so that level of change is huge. Now, when I started talking about this, how many of you thought I was talking about this kind of construction? This is what we're used to, right? This is wood frame. 80% of Canadians live in wood frame buildings. And how many of you initially thought, and I actually do want to see a show of hands, when I said tall wood buildings, how many of you said, yeah, but what about fire, right? Yeah, I've been here before. I know how this works. So the truth is the buildings we're talking about are nothing like this. They use mass wood and what are called mass timber panels. So they use large pieces of wood that perform totally differently in fire. Think about it this way. If you took a match and tried to light a log on fire, would it catch in the fireplace? No. You need to build it up from small pieces and work your way up until you get to a big piece of wood. Large, massive pieces of wood don't burn. And our building codes have actually understood that for a long time, which is why you see heavy timber buildings, big, massive buildings. They don't burn, and they burn very predictably, very slowly, and actually very safely. And every fireman will tell you that, although it seems counterintuitive. We, in the last short little while, have started working with wood where we glue it together to make huge panels of wood that are 60 feet long, 64 feet long, 8 feet wide, and of various thicknesses. So we have jumbo building blocks, effectively. I often use the analogy that we all grew up as kids with a pile of Lego, and we had those little 8-dot bricks of Lego. And that's like a 2x4. And you can make all kinds of cool things. But when you sifted through the pile and you pulled out that 24-dot brick of Lego, and you're like, cool, I can do something really big with this, that's what this is. This is jumping in scale to these large-scale panels, which just shifts the imagination of how we build and the techniques of how we build, and we're just beginning to do that. So there's different types of these panels, and I thought I'd show you a few of our recent buildings where we were exploring these materials and really exploring them as stepping stones to moving to these taller and taller buildings and how they work. This is City Hall in North Vancouver, a building I finished about a year ago. It's actually where I live, and so it's fun to do. And if you look inside this building, these are composites of these large panels, they're 32 feet wide. And when we assembled them together, they're using trees that are only 15 to 20 years old. Sometimes this material is, as I said earlier, 10, even 12 years old wood that's reconstituted and uses the strength of the fiber and the strength of the glue when bonded to make these jumbo panels and make something very fire safe and very durable and very strong. So we assembled this building really quickly. Speed, like we saw with the example in China, is a really important function of the cost effectiveness of a building. And so part of the way we make this work is actually by making these jumbo building blocks work for us from a speed point of view. So I'll just show you a couple images of that space. Right now we're doing Ronald McDonald House as well, and it's under construction. In fact, I'm leaving because my daughter and I are running in the great race for Ronald McDonald House tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. in Vancouver, so I'm going to be very tired after this. If anybody of you want to sponsor me, I'm still taking sponsors. But we're working on Ronald McDonald House, which is going to serve 73 families in BC, and we're building it in this technique that's never been done before. It's using what are called cross-laminated timber panels. These are using the beetle kill wood, the wood that's been dying off and all over Canada, the United States, as a result of climate change. The beetle doesn't die out, and now they live and have been killing vast stretches of our forest. This uses a very low-quality wood when glued together to make incredibly durable structures, 200-year, 250-year lifespan structures, in a new way. And this is under construction right now, so it's very fun for us to see it because it's the first time we've done it. We're tilting up these panels, kind of like the way we used to do with big tilted up concrete panels. But I'm really here to talk to you about wood skyscrapers. And before I do it, I really need to explain the story of why, and we're going to start with climate and carbon. 50% of energy use in North America goes from buildings into the operating and manufacturing of buildings, and only 28% from transportation. We don't talk about it enough, but it's a huge, huge portion of our energy consumption. When it comes to greenhouse gases, it's almost the same. Almost half of our greenhouse gas emissions are from the building industry. And again, it's not talked about enough. And when you look at the carbon footprint of buildings, the majority of it today is in heating and cooling. It's in the power and energy to operate the buildings. But we're getting better at making our buildings more and more energy efficient and using more efficient devices and insulating our buildings better. And so we're doing a better job of reducing our heating and cooling demands, which is great. But about 30% of the greenhouse gases are actually just the embodied energy and greenhouse gas in the material that you build with. And most people don't realize that when it comes to carbon dioxide, these are the percentages of CO2 made by man, or greenhouse gases made by man on Earth. About 1.6 comes from the airline industry, 3% from shipping, but 5 to 8% is just from concrete alone. And it's not from the concrete, it's actually the making of cement, heating it up and so forth, has a huge footprint. And obviously that's roads, but a big part of that's buildings. And when it comes to steel, it's about 4%, and about 4% of world energy goes into steel. These are both great materials, but we have to use less of them. Because unlike steel and concrete, wood is a material that sequesters carbon. During its life as a tree is growing, it's taking in carbon dioxide, giving back oxygen to the atmosphere and holding on to that carbon. If it falls to the forest floor and rots, it's going to give it back to the atmosphere. But if you take that piece of wood and put it into a building or into a piece of furniture and into a toy, it's going to hold on to that carbon for its life. And our two solutions to start talking about how to reduce our climate impact are to reduce our emissions and to find ways to store carbon. And wood does both, and it's the only material I can build with as an architect that does both those two things, only major material. So the other story, why, is really world housing. So a couple of big statistics. 100,000 people a day need a new home worldwide, and we need to build every day here forward at a rate of at least 100,000 new homes, another 100,000 people needing a new home. That's the equivalent right now of about 3 billion people needing a new home in the next 15 years, or 40% of the world. It is a huge, huge scale of building that's coming upon us. And if you think back to the statistics of the materials we currently build with, steel and concrete, and the carbon footprint of those, if we were to meet this demand, we have a problem. There's an intersection of those two things that will cause a huge problem unless we change our ways, and do so in a very major way. 1 billion people in the world live in slums. About 100 million people live in homeless conditions and refugee conditions. The scale of the building problem is huge, and the human need is huge. And unfortunately, my profession is caught a little bit in a cycle about, in my opinion, talking about the wrong things, talking about the beautiful but not the meaningful. And I think that has to change, and it has to change with a level of systemic change. And it has to change in our cities. Because a lot of the conversation that we'll see in the mainstream media is about really cool things, stacking shipping containers and building out of rammed earth and straw bale construction, and those are great things. But they're suburban scale solutions. They're one-story buildings. Today, the world's 50% urban, and it's going to move to being 75% urban in the next 10, 15, 20 years. When that happens, we were talking about big buildings, and currently every city on Earth builds the exact same way. Steel, concrete, concrete masonry. It means we have to reinvent the materials we build our cities with and rethink how we do that, which brings me back to wood skyscrapers. But as I said, it's also part of realigning the value system of the profession of architecture. Right now, when you come out of architecture school, so many are craving that possibility of fame and celebrity-style buildings. And if you look at the icons of our profession, I kind of look at it like this, and I grabbed this from Mr. Rose's talk the other day. We wanted flying cars, instead we got 140 characters. I look at it like this. We wanted a universal sustainable shelter. Instead we got fancy shapes and parametric modeling. I stood on a stage in New York at the Innovation Conference for Architectural Record, which is the big US publication, and I stood on stage with Bill Baker, who is the man who designed Burj Khalifa, and a whole host of my heroes in this industry. And they talked about parametric modeling and BIM, building information modeling systems, these things that are great techniques for how we do our work, but they're not meaningful for how we deliver for mankind. And I think that's the shift that we have to make. And if you look at the most famous individual in my profession for the last 20 years, and what many people are chasing in the mindset of what is the exciting new architecture of the world, this is what you get. And I'm going to get in a little trouble for this when I'm going to do it. Because I'm actually pretty upset about it. I think this is important to me. So, I think when we look at that need, that human need, and we look at that footprint, we're really creating this discussion. Now, I did put a little caveat in here that just I wanted to add. I sent this talk to my office for them to upload it, and I got this immediate photograph of the screen of my computer saying, "Are you sure you want to put this on stage?" Isn't that just ridiculous? But here's the problem, right? It's more than just the direction that our profession are trying to take. It's actually more about how we look at the importance of buildings in our society. And I think the lost voice of the prominence and importance of buildings in our society, and this statistic really brings it out. This is the US spending on innovation as a federal government. So remember the stat I gave you. Almost half of energy, almost half of greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings. And you notice there's no little house icon up there. Buildings fall somewhere between the light bulb and the beaker, and 0.0001% of US innovation spending goes to buildings and building sciences. Biggest problem, smallest investment. Why doesn't that happen? Well, it's because architects are mom and pop shops. We're small offices of 20 people, of 3 people, and the biggest we have are 1,000. There is no Ford Motor Car company that's going to change our industry and say, I'm going to start over with the design of cars or start over with the design of buildings. It doesn't exist. We grow organically with our ideas, and therefore we share, and we Creative Commons, and we try to spread these ideas, but it is a very slow-moving industry. And our footprint is so much bigger. But there are, I think, some changes. And I think this is just a small one. I'm going to get into wood skyscrapers for real. And as I said, people kind of thought I was crazy when we started talking about it, but I remind them that the first skyscraper in the world was only 10 stories tall. 4 years later, and people were afraid to walk under it, we had the Eiffel Tower, which reshaped the imagination of every city on Earth to get steel and concrete buildings. But there are these codes that developed over the last century that started to tell us that we couldn't build wood buildings very tall, and so we weren't allowed to. The British Columbia Building Code, BCBC, said in 2008 that I could only build a building that was 4 stories tall. And then there was all this work in BC. It's a forestry economy, so people thought, yeah, we need to sell more wood, so let's build higher. And we were allowed to build 6, and everybody got really excited. And I thought to myself, yeah, but my buddy Andrew Waugh already built 9 in the UK, which was the world's tallest contemporary wood building. It's not very tall. But he'd already done it by the time our code changed. And more importantly, I was riding my bike across Japan with my son at the time, and I got this text message from my office, and they said, hey, this is really cool. Our code changed. Isn't it great? And I said, yeah, but the problem is I just walked out of a building that's this tall, and more importantly, it was built 1,400 years ago in wood. We have a problem. And, obviously we have solutions. So we developed something we call FFTT, which everybody at the online architecture publication Tree Hugger really made fun of because it stands for Finding the Forest Through the Trees. I wanted to give it a jargony title. But it's a new system of building with wood, and we've been developing all kinds of different systems and testing them and looking at them from fire performance and acoustic and structural performance and designing 30 stories in Vancouver, which is high earthquake, and making it work. And what we found is the more we did this, actually, the easier it got. And now, thankfully, it's been embraced. It's been embraced by the province of BC, and we are actually building now what will be the world's tallest wood building. We just broke ground on it about 3 weeks ago. It's not very tall. We're not even breaking a sweat. It's a problem. But it's actually a wood design and innovation center in northern BC. More importantly, the Canadian federal government got on board with this and put up an RFQ that's out this summer for any developer and architect in Canada to try to build tall wood buildings. They'll actually help fund it. That is huge. That's a huge shift for us from really people thinking we were in the wilderness with this idea to the federal government coming on board in just a year and a half. So we're excited. things are going to change quickly now, and that's unheard of in our profession in this kind of way. Why it's important is because if I built that building, that Wood Innovation Design Center, in concrete, it would have a concrete footprint from its construction phase, not once it's built, but for the making of the concrete. And the wood would, as an alternative, would sequester. And the net difference between the two is about 2,300 tons of carbon, which is about the equivalent of taking 450 cars off the road. Now let's leap back to that statistic of 100,000 people a day needing a new home. Build them in concrete, build them in wood, and what happens? That story matters, right? The choice of material matters. 3 billion people needing a new home. So there's a lot of other really good questions I know you'll have, and I'll try to answer a few of them, and grab me in the hall if you want to know more detail. But here's a couple of more important statistics. North America forest grows for that building every 5 minutes enough wood. That doesn't mean this is easy. Deforestation is about 25% of man's greenhouse gas impact as a result of deforestation. We don't want everybody to go off and cut down trees to make this happen, but there is a way to do it responsibly through certification and conservation. We actually have the support of the Sierra Club and Greenpeace because they understand that wood products actually are part of the solution. The environmental movement has moved a long way from where we were before, but we have to harvest wood in a very responsible way, and our techniques in Canada and the United States are actually getting very good. And we have certification that makes sure that we respect everything from forest ecology to Indigenous people's rights in the forest. That doesn't mean it happens everywhere around the world, but I'm actually hopeful that this will be part of the change to deforestation. I actually believe that in the Southern Hemisphere, where we can grow gum trees in 7 years and reconstitute that wood into being those large panels I showed you in our City Hall project, I actually believe that changes the forest economy in places that are used to deforesting to get money from their land for agriculture. If there's an incentive to replant trees, and young trees sequester carbon faster than old trees, then all of a sudden we change the game by providing that housing and at the same time providing a better climate solution and even ecology solution. So we've been exploring this in lots of different ways, and the last two things I have to show you is this is a project in New York that's not real for us. It is a real project, but it's not real for us. This is my alma mater, Cornell University, decided that they're going to build a new high-tech university. The highest tech, the CEO of Google's on the board, and they brought together some very impressive people on this island called Roosevelt Island, and they went off and hired, truthfully, iconic architect to do the first building, who I don't think is part of that next generation conversation. And I feel like we need to build high-tech schools out of high-tech materials, and again, going back to that first slide, I think wood is that answer. And so we thought we'd just show what that looked like, and we made this little movie.
Hot sand on toes, cold sand in sleeping bags. I come to know that memories were the best things you ever had. The summer shorn, beat down on bonehead backs, so far from home where the ocean stood, down dust and pine bone tracks. We slept like dogs down by the fireside, awoke to the fog were all around us, the boom of summertime.